If you'd all join me with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lights on? Lights on. But nobody's on?
I've heard people tell me that.
No problem.
Okay, this morning we're going to start the budget wrap-up. Cindy, you want to start off, or Jim?
Let me start off real quick, and then Cindy can go over her numbers. What she's tried to do is compile the information as you all made decisions over the past week. But one of the things that we have put in here is that I had asked Cindy to go ahead and restore the 4.62% that we had reduced people's salaries. The reason for that, this will be the fourth year that there's been no compensation adjustment, and in fact, a percentage of people have taken a pay reduction over the last 2 years. Based on the work and the hard work that all the department directors, as well as everyone else in the organization that put this thing together, it's my opinion that we ought to restore that 4.62. We have the opportunity to do that this year, and we would recommend it. So it is included in the numbers.
Is it 4.62 only the management, or is it all personnel throughout the...
Well, it's anybody 70,000 and above. For example, lieutenants are affected by this decision.
And that would not include individuals who have been hired or promoted since the 4.62 when deduction took place?
No, it is not.
Okay, I agree with that. Everybody else?
I would like to hold off till we continue with our review of the budget. I mean, obviously, I commend many of our managers. I think we've made some great progress. I still think there's some other areas that I would like to look at for further reduction, but I have no objection to putting that when we look at calculating our maximum millage.
Where's everyone else stand? Dick?
I have no problem putting it back.
And I'd like to see the numbers. Let's go ahead and go through those and put those in at the later part of this morning.
Jay, we're talking about putting the 4.2% back in.
4.62, where we had the salary reductions. We've been 4 years without any compensation change. Then we went through the furlough for a couple of years. And then since I've been here, we reduced the 4.62. And based on the efforts and the work that the people have put forth, for example, in this budget process, I think we need to restore that and bring it back to a salary that they had 4 years ago.
For the management.
I understand. I don't want to see this decision made now. I'd like to see it come back.
It'll be included in the budget, and so
okay.
You can make your decision.
Okay, Cindy?
What you have in front of you is 2 pages. What I've done is try, at least at a high level, and certainly, these are kind of subject to change as we refine the numbers, capture what we've done over the last week and see where it leaves us before we proceed to setting the millage. The first page is the revenues. We've got 2 columns here. We've got the original 13-14 baseline budget, if you will, and then we've got the change in assumption that we made right at the very beginning of our hearings this week, that we would not complete the FP&L sale in 13-14. And so that column shows you how that affects the revenues, things that go away, things that increase when we make that change in assumption. And we talked about that, I think, toward the beginning of the week. The next column is going to track, and this is more obvious on the expenditures page, the additional changes that we have made as we move through the week, as I understand them. The only reason for the only revenue change is that some of the things that we added back in expenditures actually increase the general fund admin transfers to other departments. We talked about that with the cashiers. They're almost exclusively charged out. So that number goes up because of the things we added back on the expenditure side. But that's the only revenue change at this point from the discussions that we've had this week. And this particular sheet, as we talked about before, the ad valorem taxes there are based on last year's millage rate of 2.0336. The expenditure page has a little more action on it, and I'd like to walk down through that. Again, we have the original budget the change in assumption for not completing the FP&L sale. That column, that change in assumption, is two things. One, the pension savings, because we're not assuming anymore that we'll pay off the unfunded liability midway through the year, and also some personnel changes that we have always said would occur naturally as a result of the sale. So that's where that column comes from, and we've talked about it before. The next column, though, the additional changes, this is what I'd like to walk through as a recap to make sure that I understood correctly the direction that I've received sort of throughout the week. So let's take it department by department, and there's some notes out to the side where it came from. The first one is City Council. You all made a motion to reduce your schools and meetings budget by $2,500. And stop me as we walk through these if any of these are not your understanding of what you directed. The city manager reduced his postage number. Coming down to finance, we restored the cashier window and have taken the direction to come up with a 6-month plan for winding that down or reducing that service in a way that's more appropriate than just chopping it off at October the 1st. And again, that is salaries for full and part-time cashiers, but a big portion of that number is reflected in the increased revenues for the admin charge out as well. The next one in warehouse is to restore the delivery services attendant. Again, that's the fully loaded cost of doing that, but a big portion of that number is reflected in increased admin charges because it's charged out to other departments. Under the police, we had a couple of changes. The first was to restore the dispatch personnel and the associated operating costs and remove the Indian River County Sheriff's contract dispatch. That was a net we talked about of about $213,000. And then we also restored the DARE and the crime prevention line items for another $4,000 or $5,000. Based on some conversation throughout the week, Monty did go back and look at a couple of his departments, fleet management, facilities management. He has reduced his line item for contract painting and fleet management by $1,000 and reduced the combination of contract painting and electrical supplies in facilities management by $10,000. The non-departmental actually went down by about $105,000, and so what I've got at the bottom of the page is a little breakout of that because there were lots of things going on in that budget. We did restore the funding for Main Street Vero Beach at $25,000, restored the funding for holiday lights at $20,000. However, we did have a fairly substantial reduction in those separation costs because the dispatchers and the other two positions we put back were actual layoffs and would have resulted in unemployment compensation as well as sick and vacation payouts. So that gave us the benefit of that fairly substantially. Recreation transfers come from non-departmental, and so we actually increased we restored the lifeguards for $25,000. And for now, pending some further discussion, we restored the Royal Palm Point fountain to the $8,000 mark. The next two line items are, first of all, what Jim had just talked about. It's our calculation that to restore the 4.62% pay cut in the general fund for those employees that took one over $70,000 would be $110,347, and that would include the FICA Medicare applied to it. That number is smaller than the amount we saved when we made the cuts because there are at least 3 or 4 people who are no longer here that were part of those general fund cuts, and so obviously those would not be restored, and there were some fairly substantial numbers there. So that is smaller than it was what we saved. And then finally, this is just a note, and this number is it moves around. As you know, when we set a budget, we use the actuarial assumption from the prior year. In other words, our March 2013 valuation to set the budget for next year for the total pension contribution. That's the only number we know right now. What will happen is in March of next year, we'll get the revised actuarial valuation, and we will true up our contributions depending on whether it goes up or down. 2 years back, it actually stayed flat. Then 1 year, it actually went down a little. Unfortunately for 12-13, and subsequently the only number I have for 13-14, it's gone up about $480,000 citywide, which impacts the general fund as well. However, I anticipate, and I'm not an actuary, that when it gets trued up in March of next year, it actually will go back down a little. As Rocky explained, the valuation for March 2013, 2 things, included that last year of recognizing the big losses that were smoothed over 5 years from back in 2008 timeframe. And the second thing is, whenever you lower salaries, which we've done fairly substantially in the general fund and throughout the organization, it takes a year. There's a year lag before the valuation catches up with the 4.5% of the lowered salaries. So for conservatism, we will use this higher number. It affected the general fund by about $86,000. And again, as we change the budgets in other departments, we recalculate this sort of right up till the end, but that's the number as it sits right now, and I anticipate that that'll actually go down a little bit next year. Hopefully I won't be wrong about that. And so with that, with all of these changes, assuming that those reflect all the ones we talked about and I'm not missing any, kind of the bottom line of this whole thing is back on the first page. Right now, that would leave you with an unappropriated surplus, in other words, revenues higher than expenditures, of $314,000 right there at the bottom of that column on the far right-hand side on page 1. As we talked about yesterday, it's only July, and we still have a fair number of unknowns. A big one for me being the general insurance quotes we don't have yet. Certainly, we've just begun union negotiations. And so, although that number is reasonably conservative, I will say, it could go up or down a little bit. I think it would be my recommendation, and maybe Jim can speak to this, that's for now, an appropriate amount of breathing room as we move through the next couple of months and clarify some of those things that are really unknowns right now. So,
I think, as Cindy has indicated, we still have unknowns, and you'll have unknowns right up through September. And I think having a fund balance that we can work with is very, very important at this stage. And that's compared to a $19 million number. It's a relatively small percentage.
Oh, without going into detail, you have unknown employee considerations too, and I won't go into any detail.
So actually, our surplus is 313 plus the 110, which is the 4.62% pay cut that we did not discuss during this week. So we actually have a $420,000.
Exactly, because that 110 is, as you discussed, that's included in this, so you would see where it leaves you. But yes, you have 433 or so,
which is a percentage of
out of 19,
2 or 3% over, which is. Sorry?
I don't know. I'll figure it. 1.5.
It's all right. We don't need the calculator. It's just a small percentage. It's less than 5% surplus.
Absolutely. And, the other thing is, and we'll talk about this.
Real quick, Cindy, it's not really a surplus because it is a fund balance that we will have to see some unknowns that are out there. So I don't think we want to call it a surplus at this stage.
I stand
Certainly,
corrected.
when everything stops moving in September, then we'll know how big that number really is. And, as we've talked about in the past, the millage you set today is your high water mark, if you will, and certainly can change as we move through the summer. But
what is the date this year by which we need to set the actual rate?
I'm going to recommend when we talk about the millage setting that the two public hearings be September the 3rd and September the 18th.
And we'll have the rest of the information you need by that time?
It was actually our intention, and we wanted to talk about it today, to have another workshop in mid to late August, as we did last year, just so that we can bring you the everything we know then, including hopefully some better numbers on insurance by then, as well as incorporate these changes and the changes in the other funds into another full budget package, so we could have one more review of it before we just come to the first public hearing cold and have to go through the whole thing at the public hearing.
So they were the 13th and 18th?
3rd and 18th.
13th, yeah. Okay, that makes
3rd and 18th.
Another question. We are in the midst of union negotiations right now. How will this deciding to restore the pay cut to the managers assist or hinder us in those union negotiations? Is there anything you can say about that?
Would not have any effect because we'd be restoring salaries back to the stage that they were 2 years ago, actually 4 years ago, but everybody was affected by furloughs. So instead of affecting the entire organization, so the salary change will put them back to what their base salary was.
And would that not be deemed a goodwill gesture?
I would certainly hope so, because it does affect at least one bargaining unit.
It does affect. And if I could, I stand corrected. I didn't have my sheet out in front of me. The 3rd and the 17th. The 3rd and the 17th. The 18th is a county date. So.
Well, I still have no problem with the restoring the 4.625 or whatever it is, what it's worth.
4.62.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have no problem with that either.
Well, I kind of got a small problem with that. Interestingly enough, when we go through the budget one of the things that seems to be that was cut was a lot of the clerical staff. Paying our top people more money and then cutting out their clerical staff seems to me that, well, we're going to be paying more money to do lower cost tasks. The idea of having a director answer the phones because there is no clerical staff doesn't sit well with me. I talked to a few people, and I thought if we could have a couple of the clerical staff go into a position of floating, so to speak. The idea that if one of the offices got busy with a project, for an example, legal got busy or planning and zoning got busy, that we would have a clerical staff that could float around and cover those positions. I don't like the idea of paying somebody $80,000, $90,000 to answer a phone, and certainly to pay them more money to do that. It just doesn't sit well.
My thinking is that freezing the pay is one thing, reducing pay is something else, and that it just seems to me that I know fairness is not an issue or something we should be discussing, but the fact of the matter is, if your salary has been reduced from 4 years ago, then it just seems to me that catch up at least to the base salary that they had 4 years ago would be right to do. Having a floating clerical work. Now, the fact of the matter is, if you had one or two, you're still going to have some of your major managers still answering the telephone and doing some of that work. Now, one of the advantages we have in today's world is it is an electronic world, so some of that work can be done electronically. And I've heard the discussion that we're going to be paying people a higher wage to do lower menial jobs. I look at it more as they're taking on more responsibility and carrying out the function of that role more than the menial jobs, because I don't think there is such a thing as a menial job.
And also, I can imagine it would be frustrating to the public to call a specific department and speak to somebody on the phone who isn't acutely aware of what's going on in that department and end up getting put on hold and getting transferred back to the director anyway.
Well, we will have floating, coming back to what Jay was talking about. We will do that. I mean, we're going to interchange people in departments as we do now. I mean, that's going to be something in order to carry out the function, because we're getting our staffing levels down that if somebody goes home sick, there's going to have to be somebody to fill some of those roles. Now, one of the things that we did talk about, and I believe what the council said, you would like us to investigate the phone tree and take more advantage of that and make sure that we have a phone tree that when people call in, they may not talk to an individual, using that as an example.
Following all our modifications this week to the budget, what's our final personnel count for the city?
What was it and what is it?
We'll go back to the spreadsheet that we attached to this, if we could. I don't know if you have the original memo that we sent out. If you want to look at attachment D.
I came up somewhere around 316. But I mean, I wanted to check my numbers because I was just...
The original budgeted positions for 12-13 were 430. The cuts at October 1 were really the only ones now that we're contemplating because we did away with this sale. Would have been 43, and what we've restored is 10 positions in dispatch and 2 in finance and warehouse. So the cuts will be 31 out of 430.
Well, how about the...
And the customer service, didn't we make another change?
Oh, and one there. I'm sorry.
And lifeguards.
Lifeguards stay the same.
There is one, okay.
But I thought we had some lifeguard cuts that would have happened.
Let's walk down through these one at a time. The 31 in the general fund will go backwards by 12, so that'll be 19. The 1 in customer service remains. The 4 in the water sewer fund remain. The airport cut remains. The solid waste cut remains. It'll be 1 in recreation instead of 2. So you're right. Instead of 43, it'll be 43 minus 10 to 13. So it'll be 30. So it will take it from 430 to 400.
To 400 would be the final count.
Mm-hmm. We'll take the general fund from 202 and a half. We love that half person. To 183.
What was it before?
202.
To go back to the discussion of the restoring the 4.62, one thing I think we need to be aware of, and that is that for the first time we do have an increase in a number of years in our taxable property rate. We've got a 1.75% increase is what you told us that was coming out of David Nolte's office, which is about $50,000, $60,000, somewhere in that we're showing an increase in the ad valorem taxes. So we should keep that in the context that increase would then be going right back to the employees that we took it away from a couple years ago. And whether or not we may want to have a discussion is that would be about a 2% increase if we wanted to factor that over the next 2 years. A 2% increase this year and then a 2% the next year is a possibility as well, instead of the 4.62 back.
Well, let's make this I'll make a formal motion to return or restore the 4.62% pay.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Sorry for discussion, Mayor. Once again, I still would like to leave this up for further discussion in the budget. I mean, we've gone through this exercise, and we have reduced our budget by $137,000. I mean, less than 1%. With all the cuts we've made, we are still at 400 employees, which is one city employee for every 38 residents, and that's compared to the benchmark cities of average of 1 per 88 citizens. I mean, I think we still have a lot more looking at our budget to do before we go forward and approve this.
And actually, if I could, the budget actually was reduced by probably something closer in the neighborhood of $900,000. And the reason is, and this is so confusing, and I promise we'll never do this again, but last year's budget, the 12-13 budget, did not include that $680,000 for debt service because of the early payment of debt service the year before. So if you're comparing the bottom line of 12-13 to the bottom line of 13-14, you have to add $680,000 to 12-13 because that was the year we skipped that debt service payment. It is the most, and next time we won't make any early debt service payments because
But even looking at 11-12, we were at 19,261, and here we're proposing 19,314.
Any other discussion?
One quick comment. I mean, we'd be paying more for people to manage less and less. I don't see where that's justified at all. They're managing less people, they're managing a smaller budget, and they're doing lower paying tasks.
Once again, I'd request that we defer this discussion until we have numbers in from pension, from health care, from all of our costs.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Opposed.
Settle that.
I would like to make a motion that we accept a 2.3% increase in these managers' pay, and with the hopes that we could follow that up next year with an increase, which we expect in the taxable property.
Hearing no second, motion will die for lack of a second.
Should I then take it that based on that motion and vote, this should be removed from the next version of the budget, or should we bring it back for further discussion?
Let's just bring it back.
Once again, I have no objection to retaining it in this exercise for establishing a maximum millage rate.
Okay, we've settled that one.
But by retaining it, does it not then show up in the budget?
Yes.
Yep.
The next draft budget that you see. That's all I'm looking for. Should I go ahead and leave it in the next draft budget for further discussion, or should we remove it now?
Yes. Leave it in for next discussion.
Does everybody agree with that, or at least yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No?
If it's just in the draft, we're not passing it. So
No, you're not passing a budget today.
Passing anything.
You're not passing anything until September the 18th. Or 17th. I keep wanting it to be the 18th for some reason.
Okay.
Just a small subject from yesterday that I see laying in front of me and put it on the floor when we discuss it. The cemetery rate comparison would tend to indicate that we can do something on rates, and not that we can or should do it here, but it looks like it should, be referred back to you, Jim, for further rate work. It's my opinion.
Well, do we need to take into consideration the quality of our facility as compared to the nearest other one in the county, Sebastian?
If we're going to do a rate adjustment in the cemetery, the answer to the question is yes. I would recommend that we go and price our product at the quality of product we have.
And
I'm sorry, Tracy.
I would recommend that we ask a couple of the funeral home directors in the area to get together with you to meet to discuss these issues and any concerns that they have or hindrances that they feel that we are doing in providing that service.
And I have no problem with that, but on this sheet it's got Fernhill and Stewart for $27.95. We're $9.50. Fountainhead, I don't know anything about it. $4,000 Orlando. So it would look like there's an opportunity here. That's all.
And I think there is a tremendous opportunity. We are maintaining this cemetery to the standards of a private cemetery. And we are not, in my opinion, covering all our costs. I think we're still undercosting the clerical service, handling of cash, et cetera. I would like to see that reviewed. I would also like to caution you that although we have spent our capital in the last 8 years on upgrading the cemetery, cemeteries survive on selling plots. So I don't know how many remaining plots we have out there. I realize we do have the columbarium, but for sustainability, for long-term life of this cemetery, you're going to have to look at possibly expanding to other city property that we have. We need to start saving for capital to do those improvements, or we're going to be spending another quarter of our tax dollars, almost $1 million going into the cemetery. And I don't think that is the best use of our tax money.
I don't think we disagree, but if we pass it back to Jim, I mean, there is further land that we could use. The columbarium is nearly empty. Be that as it may, I think we should pass it to Jim as far as rates and as far as a long-term plan and all the rest of it.
Well,
Absolutely. I think it needs a long look.
I mean, like you say, you have diminishing resources. Let's do this sooner than later.
We will.
Thank you.
I mean, if you could do it by 3 meetings from now or something like that, as a goal.
As a goal, we'll try to do that. I'll be relying on Monty since his folks really know the operation there, but we'll make it work and come back to the council with a recommendation.
Are we through with the wrap-up, Cindy?
Unless there are any questions or unless you think there's anything I missed in the recap that we talked about this week.
Nope. I think everybody's satisfied. Sure.
First, I'd like to say I want to thank a lot of the staff. I know when we start looking at reductions, it's always a very difficult process. But once again, getting back to our benchmarking exercise that we did last fall, the cities that we selected were not selected by me. These cities were selected by staff, and they were selected by cities that most closely emulate the city of Vero Beach, not only in tax revenue, but in composition of their cities, amenities offered, location, etc. And that's how these cities were established. Every department utilized those city budgets and organizations to do their benchmarking. Employee productivity cannot be evaluated in a vacuum. We have a city that has a history of never having performance appraisals, never having any performance standards whatsoever. So in order to measure our productivity, we have to have some criteria. Certainly there are reasons for variations between the cities, and not all cities do theirs the same way. But they're still trying to do these essential services. And this was our opportunity to seek better solutions. A reduction in force doesn't necessarily mean a reduction in service. It may mean more aggressive performance standards, targets, cross-training, and restructuring. Back in 2003, we had 549 city employees. I do not believe that we've seen the demise of the city of Vero Beach as we've reduced from 549 to the current 400. Once again, I still feel that our city employees per population is high. We are a premier city, and I know that we need to do that, but still the ratio, I think, is out of line. Particularly, I'd like to challenge the managers to go back, look at their budgets. I'd like to challenge City Council to please go back and review the benchmarking for these areas. For streets and traffic, the average of our benchmark cities is 12. Vero Beach is 21. We are 75% higher in this category. Our grounds and maintenance average was 13. We are 29. We are over 100% higher in that category. And in solid waste, the average is 18. The city of Vero Beach is 26, which is 45% higher. These are cities, like I said, of comparable populations and size. And I would just ask that with the next review that we please go back and take a serious look at those areas.
Just a minute. We have somebody from the audience.
Real quick, if I could, Mayor. On the benchmarking with the other cities, I would just like to ask if the other benchmark cities had the electric employees in the comparison.
No, the electric employees were eliminated from all the comparisons, Steve.
Because, but you're still talking about them in the total number of total city employees when you're talking about the budget today. And, keep in mind, okay, and those electric employees will probably still be here several years from now. That's my guess. If you're going to compare apples to apples, when you're stating the numbers of what current city employees are today, you need to remember that the other benchmark employers did not compare with the electric employees. So when you're saying over 400 employees, you have to keep that in mind also.
Correct. So if we take the electrical out, we're at 300.
Right.
And still, in looking at our benchmark cities, the average is around 200. The average ratio, like I said, is one city employee per 88 of their population. The electrical, yes, has been eliminated. I'm sorry, I did bring up the 400.
200,
earlier.
And then you have water and sewer, which a lot of the other benchmark
These
cities
have water and sewer, fire and rescue,
which
marinas,
water and sewer is almost another
trash,
70.
police. Actually, yes.
So.
Actually, the average for water and sewer is 40.
Well,
we are on the high end at 50, but we're closing that gap.
Yeah, but there's other things to consider there. The age of the system, the types of lines. I can assure you, in representing these employees, and even knowing the management staff here and how the working relationships are and how these employees are busting their butt every day. You can't get rid of very many employees because you're going to keep doing what you're doing in parks with mowing now. Oh, we got to reduce staff. Okay, you're going to reduce a couple more staff in parks, and then you're going to drive by Dodgertown like I do every single day, and you're going to look. The grass is now, it went from 3 foot last week, now it's 4 feet tall. Okay, just so you know. Okay, but these are the decisions that you're making at this table, which are affecting what this city looks like. So, keep in mind, you reduced a couple staff, and then the city of Vero Beach doesn't look like the city of Vero Beach has always looked because you saved $20,000, $30,000. It's, is it worth $20,000 or $30,000 to see the city of Vero Beach look like crap? I don't think so. We laugh, but it really looks terrible.
I would have to agree with that. I drove down A1A today and found grasses all over the sidewalks that people are jogging over. They mowed the grass too short, and you have big brown spots right there. It's just absolutely unreal.
And around Indian River Boulevard, when you turn the corner, I didn't look this morning because I didn't turn the corner, but the grass is knee high in some places. It's not thick, but it still hasn't been mowed in a long time in front of the electric plant, and as you move down towards the fingers. So
once again, we have established that we have a starting problem with that particular contractor that we had gone out for services with. I still think you have to staff for the norm, for your average workload, and not for your peaks. Obviously, we're in a rainy season, and we need mowing every week. Nobody's in our homes. Even if you mow once a week, you feel still like you're getting, can't get ahead of it.
Cutting the grass too short so that it can't grow back is a complete lack of professionalism. That's going to take some money to repair that. And it's right there, front and center, right in front of Riomar for everybody to see.
Once again, that's part of the contract management that we need to improve.
Additionally, I'd like to make a comment on the benchmarking. Quite frankly, in my opinion, the number of employees is actually irrelevant. What it is relevant is the price per service. We pay a lower price and we get a higher service. If we go to Walmart and we have the lowest price around, but they have the highest number of employees, so what? I got the lowest price and I got the highest quality of service. This is a consumer perspective. Our people out there in Vero Beach, if they get the lowest price with the highest quality service, what does it matter how many employees we have? We produced a machine called Vero Beach that gave them the most efficient solution. As far as I'm concerned, all employees in Vero Beach are just another cog in the machine, including ourselves. If we produce the best product, whatever happens on the inside mechanisms is very, very, very efficient, and I wouldn't go ahead and make changes to threaten that.
Benchmarking is a tool, and I don't want to become a slave to the tool. I agree with Jay 100%. We've got a service that we supply, and it's starting to show on our cuts.
I agree with Jay, too. We have everything we do is very specific. I mean, we have 2 boat ramps. Others don't have 2 boat ramps. We do a great many things others don't do. We pick up garbage twice a week. You could go through the list. We clean restrooms twice a day. To compare to numbers and benchmark, I think you got to get. I've said a year and a half ago, I think you got to go to ground zero and look at what you're doing and do it the most efficient way you can. So I don't buy into benchmarking as a concept.
Well, we should benchmark. There's no doubt about it. But benchmarking is a huge tool, but it's not looked at as a tool to get rid of employees. It's looked at as a tool to ensure that we are efficient and we're doing a good job. We need to do benchmarking so that we know that we're providing great services at a great price.
Just for informational purposes, we have recently joined the Florida Benchmarking Consortium, in which we will have more detailed information as it breaks down the functions that we perform as opposed to just overall the number of employees, because it is very difficult to say that you have X number of employees in your organization when, in fact, if you go out and talk to some, even the benchmark cities, where they've actually contracted, for example, with the Sheriff's Department for police officers, it may be costing them more per capita to provide the service, but the ratio of employees looks a whole lot better than ours. And so we need to sort of keep that in mind, and this consortium will help that. And Ms. Turner, the number of people working on the streets is 17 and not 20. I think the numbers are right next to each other, but I believe 17 is our street.
The devil is in the detail. I'll just end there, but you have to look at the detail of every case. You can't. There's not a simplistic way of looking at it. I don't disagree that there's some value to the benchmarking. I'll take that back, but you have to get in the detail of what you're providing and what it costs to provide that in each specific case. I don't believe there's an easy answer just to say that somebody else does it with more or less. It bothers me.
Well, the other side of the coin, too, and I think we need to keep it in perspective, and I realize that we have the electric department that deal with this, driving everybody crazy, including myself. But if you look, and coming back to what Jay said, the cost of providing the service, compare our property taxes and the status quo that you guys have continued to put on that is a basic fundamental cost of the providing the services that we do. Then we can break it down from there. We obviously are not competitive in the electric utility, and I understand that. But we are very competitive in our water, wastewater, sanitation, and all of those other things. But an example, if you look at our reuse program that we have, we far exceed anybody in this area in providing of reuse water. And what that's allowed us to do, because the other issue that is on everyone's mind is the lagoon. There is a cost in reducing the discharge into the lagoon. The city of Vero Beach has absorbed that, and we've done it through technology, i.e. the reuse, and the way that we use the deep well injection, which again is efficiency in providing a service and a quality level of service that not only affects our residents but also that of the entire area. So, benchmarking is important. There's no question about that. And when we look at the miles of road we have, the number of people working those miles of road, when we talk about the acres that have to be mowed and maintained, the irrigated acreage versus the non-irrigated acreage, we've got to look at those things. But take just a snapshot of a project that we do. The irrigation system on Ocean Drive that the city of Vero Beach, most cities don't maintain that, and it's in our right-of-way. But we do that for the image of what we're trying to project. And we do, and you've restored it in which we contribute to Main Street. Many cities don't contribute to Main Street anymore. Main Street cities I think are actually going down in numbers. But the fact of the matter is that we've maintained that level of service. And I just want to make sure everybody keeps the scope of what we're doing. And you have to look at both the revenue and the expenditure side of what we're. And again, coming back to the department directors, with your all's insistence, which is great, and the efficiency issues, I think, are being addressed. They have to be when you start, and if nothing else, when you drop 140 employees, or whatever the number is, by the mere nature you had to become more efficient. And we started looking. You all wanted us to approach the water and sewer when we had that study done. And I think Rob Bolton's taken that thing by the bull by the horns on that and really has worked at it, and he has a game plan that far exceeds what our study talked about. And I think that Tom out at the power plant, he's looking now at the broad range of what it is providing that power, even though we're in the transitional system of dealing with Florida Power and Light. So I just want to make sure we credit folks with that. Cindy, I mean, if anybody churned any more numbers any more than she did, it'd be unbelievable. And again, that's efficiencies that need to come back, and hopefully people recognize what has taken place there.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Cindy, for that. Let's move to retiree benefits review.
I passed out a memo. Looks like this. This is just something that our ordinances require that we do every year as part of the annual budget review process, and that is prepare for your consideration the cost of living adjustment for retirees on our pension plan. The original was modified by resolution, and what it boils down to is that there is an automatic 1% increase annually for anyone who retired on or after October 1, 1998. Adjustments beyond that automatic 1% are at the sole discretion of the council. And as well, you can also provide a cost of living adjustment for employees who retired before October 1, 1998, but there is no automatic adjustment for them. Again, as required by the code, in context, the 12-month percentage change in the Consumer Price Index, the CPI-U, from May 2012 to May 2013 was 1.4%, and I've attached that information for you. And just so you understand the dollar impact, there are right now 185 employees in the general. We're just talking about general employees, not police. In the general employee retirement plan, who will get the automatic 1%, and for 13-14, that's going to increase the total annual cost by $35,000. There are also 134 employees in the plan who retired before October 1, 1998. They do not receive any automatic increase. A discretionary 1% cost of living adjustment voted on by you for these employees would increase the total benefits paid by $18,000, and our records show that the last time that group of people received a cost of living adjustment was in 2010. So with that, I just would need some discussion and a motion and a vote as to whether, one, you're interested in anything beyond the automatic 1%, and for the people that retired after October 98, and two, if you would like to apply any level of cost of living adjustment for the people who retired before that date.
Do you have the numbers for the employees who retired prior to October 1st, 1998, for the time period between 2000 and 2010, for a historical perspective on what occurred before 2010?
I do.
I thought you would.
Back in July 2010, these were the previous changes that were applied to the retirees, and it was my understanding at that time that the same, I may be wrong about this, but that the same changes were applied to both sets of retirees. In other words, when it was voted across the board. You're looking from 2010 onward, or
from 2000 to 2010? Was the council giving them a 1% pretty much per year?
October 1st of 2000, it was a 3% increase. 2001, 3.6. 2002, 3. 2003, 3. 2004, 2.65. 2005, 3. Then 3.5 in 06. 2.7 in 07. 2.3 in 08. 1 in 09, and 0 since then. or I think it was 1 in 2010. The code calls for, and certainly that's why I provided this for you as well today, that the cost of living adjustment be tied to the CPIU, the Consumer Price Index increase from year to year. And certainly looking at these numbers, that is probably exactly where those numbers came from, because as we know, for that first part of the decade, CPI was running around 3%, 2.5%. The other thing, if it's...
And the numbers you just gave me were the employees prior to...
Well, the change that required that the people after 1998 get an automatic one was a resolution 9815, and there was another resolution 10-24. So there were some changes to the pension plan during that time frame as well that changed that automatic 1%. So the automatic increase for people before 98 is where it sits right now, or after 98 is where it sits right now, and no automatic for the ones before. The other thing that I know has been discussed in this context in the past is what the federal government has done with Social Security changes, cost of living adjustments. And certainly there was a period of time in 2010, the cost of living adjustment for Social Security benefits were zero. In 2011, again, it was zero. However, in 2012, it was 3.6%. And for 2013, the Social Security adjustment is 1.7%. If you look back at the information on their website, again, in that 2010-2011 timeframe, they tie theirs to the CPI as well, and the CPI didn't increase. And so in that context, they went 2 years without one. And then this year, the 1.7% COLA that they're going to give on Social Security, again, is tied to the Consumer Price Index. They'd use the CPIW. So I don't know if that helps at all, but that's kind of where we stand.
Are you asking for a decision?
Need decisions. First, for the people who get an automatic 1%, you can, at your discretion, increase that. The second decision is for the people who don't get any automatic increase at all, would you like to provide them with an increase?
Actually, I'd like a little more time to do this. I mean, it would seem to me that the CPI, it's a good index, but I would like to see some type of a market function in there, because when we have a really bad year for our funds and then we have an adjustment upward, that really puts the public behind the eight ball on keeping that fund moving in the correct direction. But on the other hand, I don't have a problem giving the increase when the market is really good. It still keeps our fund moving in the correct direction. I would just like to see it come back and maybe see kind of a market function in there, so we just don't get put behind the eight ball so hard when the market goes down.
Again, per the code, it's for planning purposes based on the CPI. Certainly I can give you any other information you might like to see in terms of performance of the pension plan or whatever in making the decision. You're not tied to making it match the CPI, but for planning purposes, the general idea is it's tied to consumer price index increases, and that's certainly the way the federal government does it. Having said that, you can do it today. You can do it as part of it's required that you do it as part of the annual budget review process. So you don't have to make that decision today. You can do it at any point during the budget workshops. And I'm happy to bring you any information you might like to see.
I'd like to see it back. I'd like to know what the dollar amount really is.
Well, the dollar amount is $35,000. 1% employees who automatically receive it is $35,000 a year.
And that $35,000 is already in the budget for that increase?
This comes out of the pension plan. This is out of the pension fund. Yeah,
that's
so that's already in there, but
it's actually not in the budget in terms of it doesn't directly impact budget numbers. It changes the value of the pension.
But if we
fund.
gave the employees who have not had an increase in 3 years, that would be a line item.
That would be another $18,000, and it would not be a line item.
It would not be a line item.
Pension.
The pension trust fund actually makes payments to employees every year. The only way in which it eventually affects the budget is through the actuarial evaluation of how much assets we have in the pension plan versus exactly. So it doesn't come, these funds aren't paid for out of the city's budget, they're paid for out of the pension trust fund. So again, in context, the 1% for people who automatically receive it is a $35,000 cost to the pension fund next year. 1% for the people who don't automatically receive it would be $18,000.
Well, the first decision we need to make is if we want to increase the automatic 1%, right?
If you would like to stay at 1%, or if you'd like to see it be something different than that.
I would make a motion to leave it at the 1%.
I would second it.
All in favor?
Aye. I would make a motion to add 1% to the employees who have not, who retired prior to 1998, who have not received any cost of living adjustment in the last 3 years.
Here, second.
I'll second. Is this something that, we're going to have to come back in the next budget season and agree to again, or is this just a
Every
policy
year,
every
as
year?
part of the annual budget process,
Reoccurring.
you have to make this decision.
Well, I'd like to amend, if possible, just this year, and then have it come back as a decision next year.
It's already written that way in the code. It's an annual decision. Yeah, there's no, the automatic 1% sits until you amend the pension plan. But this decision about the rest or about going above the 1% is an annual decision based on the way your code is written right now.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye. Passes 3-2. Thank you, Cindy. Charter officer review.
Mr. Mayor, I'd suggest that we defer this. We've all had a really long week. I'd like to provide valuable input to our charter officers, which they sorely deserve, and I think at this point everybody's kind of worn out.
And I also was a bit surprised that this was on the agenda for today. I had not prepared, as we have in the past, with specific meetings just for this purpose, and I feel it's inappropriate now.
I don't have mine formally written out either. Let's transfer this. Tammy, what's our next meeting? Not
August 20th?
August 20th?
Or we could do it at the budget workshop if you wanted to put it on that one.
Okay, let's do that. Is that all right with everyone?
Fine. And I would ask, prior...
More budget workshops.
Yeah.
Yes, dear.
One more. I think one more.
Mr. Mayor, I would ask prior to the meeting that we get the charter officers' job descriptions, goals, and objectives distributed to council, so we'll have those to help with our reviews.
Okay, Tammy, will you do that for us?
Yes, sir.
Mr.
Place it on
Mayor, typically, too, in past life, we've had their comment about what they think, too. I don't know how we do it here. I guess my question is procedural. How do we do it here?
I think that would be part of the goal. Their own specific goals and objectives would be answering those questions.
The first part of the report would be to hear their goals. Second part of the report, I would see us as giving them a charge of what we think they should have done or
Well,
have.
for instance, today we have nothing to look at, so what we'll look at.
I have a form of my own that I review. I'll give you a copy of my form if you'd like that.
I would.
Tammy has that, I believe.
I do.
Tammy, if you just give one of those copies of my form to everyone before the meeting, I'd be your best friend for 5 minutes.
And also their objectives.
That as well as
So I
their
don't have to search for 'em.
their job descriptions with their responsibilities and duties and their objectives, so that we would all have that in hand, Mr.
I'm
Mayor.
sure I have them, but,
Yeah, I understand.
Tammy will get you that package.
Also, for some reason, traditionally, for years and years, that's been on the Friday agenda at the very end of a whole week of budget workshops, and I agree with you, that's a lot to tackle. So, with your permission, next year we'll schedule it in some different fashion rather than just tacking it on the end of a whole week of budget workshops.
Well, one of the good things about having it here, it brings it to the forefront where you start setting some time, because if we leave it off an agenda, then I'm going to surprise you sometime at a council meeting, and it's almost as bad as doing this. So at least it gives you a point of discussion and how you all want to proceed. So,
Well, I have a three-page review that you might find interesting.
Mr. Mayor, and if I may ask, as council, as we're reviewing the performance of our charter officers, we consider what goals and objectives we may wish to challenge them with for the coming year.
Oh, absolutely. I have those written out also. I think I gave them to, I know I did Jim's last year. If you have whatever your goals are, have them written down as part of this review, and we'll do it at the final budget hearing.
when is the final budget hearing?
That is a perfect segue into the next topic. What we've been suggesting is that your first public hearing be on September the 3rd,
Okay.
And your final public hearing be on September the 17th, as we did last year. I believe that coincides with the two council
regular
meeting
meeting
dates,
dates.
although we are required to advertise these budget hearings for a time certain, which means that these would have to start first, and then the council meetings would be immediately following the budget
Yeah.
hearings.
Last year we started at 5 and then went into our meeting at
5:05.
5:05. And that worked out well.
It's trim time again, all the little picky rules.
Let's
So
do
that's
that
what we're
again,
suggesting.
Tammy.
And that does keep us from coinciding with any of the school board or county commission hearings, which we're not allowed to do anyway. So.
I have a form for each of the for the city manager, for the city attorney, and for the city clerk. If you don't have those, Tammy, I'll bring one in and you can give me a copy.
I have them right here with me.
Okay,
So I'll make sure
great.
everybody gets a copy
Okay,
of it.
great. Okay, that goes to the trim tentative millage.
In your original package that came with your workshop as attachment C, we provided for you a draft copy of both the certification of taxable value that we need to provide back to the property appraiser by next week. They've asked for it by July 26th, as well as what's called the DR 420 MMP. This is the form provided by the Department of Revenue that helps us to see how the millage that you're proposing to set looks in the context of the millage limitations. In other words, how much you could set with a majority vote, with a supermajority vote, unanimously, et cetera. These forms have both been prepared on the assumption that we levy the same millage rate as last year, which is also the number that's been in your draft budget so far of 2.0336. We did have a small increase, albeit an encouraging one, in our property value. And as a result, for the first time, and as long as I can remember, the rollback rate is slightly smaller than last year's millage rate. The rollback rate would be 2.0142. And the difference, percentage-wise, between last year's millage rate, which we're proposing to levy, and that rollback rate is less than 1%. It's 0.96%. With that, what we would need to do is, just moving on to the other page. As we talked about before, the maximum millage limitations take into account the fact that if you adopt a millage in any given year that's lower than the maximum you could have adopted with a simple majority vote, you don't, I guess lose credit for that would be the proper word. This form calculates it so that it bases what you're allowed to do this year off of what you could have done last year. And so you're not going backwards in terms of keeping your flexibility as a council with regard to your maximum millage just because in any given year you do you do manage to hold taxes down. So given all that, at the bottom of this form, essentially the majority vote maximum millage rate that you're allowed this year is 2.8991. A 2/3 or a supermajority vote would get you to 3.1890, and then certainly with a unanimous vote, it can be anything up to the municipal maximum. And so with that, you need, as we did it last year, kind of 2 votes, and I would appreciate, Tammy said she'd do a roll call to set the tentative millage, which is your not to exceed at this point, which we would then put into these forms and provide to the property appraiser, and also to formally set these 2 dates as your first and second public hearing.
Well, we want to set something that we can come down from, right?
You can always come down.
But you can't go up.
Right. And do you have a suggested number for that?
Well, at this point in time, the recap that I showed you this morning with the 300 or 400,000, depending on the increases, is at last year's millage rate, is at 2.0336.
I'll make a motion to set it at last year's millage rate of 2.0336.
I'll second it.
However, would you consider that problematic, Cindy, in terms of our negotiations, which still need to take place over the next month or two?
You know, the big impact of those negotiations is, I believe, the potential impact, and Jim can stop me if I start saying things I shouldn't when we're in the middle of negotiations, is the defined contribution plan and whether the employer percentage goes up. In the general fund context, every 1% of contributions is about $50,000. So, that 400,000 gives you, 300,000 gives you some breathing room. The other changes to the proposed changes to health insurance have been factored into the budget, as you see, but again, that impact was about 50 or 60,000 in the general fund. And again, we don't know about the general insurance or the health insurance. So I don't know if you have an opinion. I mean, I think we're...
Since we sort of built the budget around it and we feel fairly comfortable with our numbers, I think having last year's tax rate, as opposed to you all adopting a number that the next thing you know is the onslaught onto City Hall, you're going up on taxes and the world's coming to an end and we all will never recognize each other again. By doing the same tax rate, I think is a reasonable number. That's what we based all of our presentations on. And hopefully that'll be the number that we adopt long term, but based on everything we have, that would be a reasonable number.
My only concern is adopting, which we expect to have, and not taking into consideration that there may be things that occur between now and then.
Certainly, you've got a
because this is a rate by which we cannot go higher than.
You've got a $300,000 or $400,000, and if something, I won't say catastrophic or huge happened, certainly you always have the option as a council to adopt a budget that isn't quite balanced and right the ship the following year. Although I hate to see that done. I don't know. I mean, I think we're both feel fairly comfortable that $300,000 or $400,000 will take us from here to September. But certainly, if you'd like to do something different in an abundance of caution, that's a policy decision.
Any more?
Just a quick comment. I mean, I've seen that we've cut services back. One thing I really hate to see is that we pay more and get less. I would suggest going back to the rollback rate. If it's a difference of $70,000, we still have an awful lot of money in reserve that we've got from our budget. We also have, as I like to say, spongeable places where we can, places that you can squeeze.
I agree with you.
I just don't like the idea of paying more and getting less. I mean, if we paid the same and getting less, I don't like that either, but I could live with that.
So where are we at right now, Mayor?
We have a motion to set the tentative millage rate at last year's of 2.0336.
And a second.
Would you call a roll, please, Tammy?
Mr. Winger?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
No.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Carroll?
Yes.
Mayor Fletcher?
Yes.
Passes 4-1.
And then just to formalize our decision about the two public hearing dates, September the 3rd would be your first public hearing, September the 17th for your second and final public hearing.
And both of these hearings are at 5 o'clock, correct?
I think technically they're 5:01, 5:05. If you don't mind, Tammy, I'll work out that 5:15 thing, but it would be just after 5.
And you need a motion for that?
Sure, that'd be good. I have to put it in this form, so I'd like
Make that a motion, Tammy.
I'll make a motion that we have our hearings on September 3rd and the 17th, beginning at 5:01.
Second.
Third.
Mr. Winger?
Roll call.
No. Mr. Winger?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Carroll?
Yes.
Mayor Fletcher?
Yes.
The last scheduling decision to make would be, and this is not as formal, what we had tentatively shown was August the 13th for a city council workshop for a final budget review before we head into that September 3rd public hearing. Do you have any thoughts about that one?
I don't have my calendar. Can we just get back to you on that?
Tammy coordinate that with all of you? And
vote on that one?
No.
Tammy.
No, you don't have to vote on that right now.
What we want to do is make sure you see the final numbers going in when we have a public hearing.
Is there anything else to come before the council? Seeing nothing, we are adjourned.